should play the Wario Land games, but only some of them. Wario has an odd place in Nintendo's roster. He arose from Mario's obscure and quirky Super Mario Land series, and though he's probably best known for the WarioWare games and gross-out humor, it's easy to forget that he started a few platformers of his own. All of them are at least decent, but some of Wario's old games, 3 of them in fact, are brilliant, fun, smartly designed gems, well worth your time and money. I'd like to take a look at a bit of Wario's history and how it relates to the Wario Land games, from his bizarre origin to the excellent games that followed and the decline in quality that probably led to Nintendo dropping the series. So, between the releases of Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World came Super Mario Land, a launch title for the Game Boy, both of which were created by Nintendo Research and Development 1, the team headed by Gunpei Yokoi and also responsible for the Game & Watch series, Metroid, and Kid Icarus. Super Mario Land had to deal with the Game Boy's limitations, and it was mostly groundbreaking for making Mario portable, an initiative that Nintendo began to take very seriously later on. Still, the developers injected some real creativity into the game, and it featured a lot of surprises. You set out to rescue the newly introduced Princess Daisy from an alien of all things. Koopas explode after you stomp on them. Every level is themed somewhat stereotypically after a different country's landmarks. The Can-Can plays when you get a superstar. Several of the levels even feature space shoot-'em-up sections that Kirby would later adopt as a recurring element. The game was short, surprising, and memorable just for how quirky it was, and it stands out to this day, where most Mario games seem to be a test of the phrase, "if it ain't broke, don't fix it." Now, reportedly, by the time they got to work on a sequel, R&D1 were getting fed up with having to keep making Mario games, which built on the success of the Shigeru Miyamoto-created hero rather than any original character of theirs. They wanted something new, and their solution was a dark echo of Mario, a hulking, comical powerhouse who literally steals Mario's island and its inhabitants, his fans, so to speak. In his final boss fight, Wario actually steals and copies the power-ups Mario has collected throughout the game, which in this black and white game take the form of hats, not color changes. Super Mario Land may have introduced a sea of oddities, but the sequel introduced a character who had more potential than as a simple antagonist. The rest of the game is decent, in different ways than its eccentric predecessor. It was built off the engine used in Metroid 2, and at first glance you could be forgiven for thinking this one is just another Mario game. But it has plenty of quirks in its 32 levels that set it apart. A climb through a giant tree thick with sap and bees, a zone where you get swallowed by a giant whale, a Halloween world filled with yokai. Not just water levels, but the ability to take the water level with you wherever you go. There's a zone where Mario gets shrunk down and has to explore a regular house, a level made of old NMB blocks dragged out of Nintendo's back catalog. The game is a lot freer on how it lets you explore these odd areas, and it ends up having even more character than the first Super Mario Land. By now, Nintendo R&D1 were onto something, and for the next game, they wanted to put Wario at the forefront. They expanded Wario's hat stealing into a system of power-ups, and they tossed out a few typical Mario mechanics. Wario is strong enough to bowl over enemies and even throw them around, and coins are no longer an arbitrary collectible that earn 1-ups. They're currency, used to unlock doors and play minigames, and they even affect the ending you get, like in Luigi's Mansion. Wario is no hero. He's a greedy opportunist, and his quest is focused not on rescuing a princess, but on collecting and hoarding treasure. The environments are less quirky and creative than its predecessors, more themed around the story of Wario trying to rob the brown sugar pirates. So you'll see a lot of mountains, leafy caves, wooden platforms and bridges, and the enemies are reused so often that a lot of areas start to feel samey. The hidden treasures you collect are pretty neat. They're few enough and challenging enough to find that they seem special, and they have an overwhelming influence on the ending you get, where Wario spends his collected wealth to buy a new home, castle, or planet of his own. Wario's movement is quite different from Mario's. He has no run button, little sense of momentum. His jumps are high but sluggish, meant for careful navigation rather than deft platforming. And he takes up a lot of space on the screen. The result is competent, even fun, but it's the later Wario games that will truly define this formula and polish it to a mere sheen. One of R&D1's next big projects was the Virtual Boy, a system that began with Gunpei Yokoi's grand ambitions and ended up downscaled, incomplete, most of its resources siphoned off toward the N64. One of the very few games for Virtual Boy was Virtual Boy Wario Land, which was less an attempt at advancing the series and more an attempt at technical innovation. The game could be played in admittedly outdated 3D. The sprites were larger and more detailed, and it introduced this neat foreground to background transition we'd see again in Kirby Triple Deluxe and Donkey Kong Country Returns. The Virtual Boy flopped and was mostly forgotten, but Wario Land is generally agreed to be the system's best game. So, a few more years pass. The Nintendo 64 releases, and Pokémon explodes onto the scene. Gunpei Yokoi resigns from the company to form his own, only to be killed in a car accident. R&D1's hardware team is spun off into Nintendo Research and Engineering, or Nintendo Red, but the software team keeps working. And in 1998, they gave Wario Land a true sequel, first on Game Boy, and then on Nintendo Red's Game Boy Color. The newly renamed Black Sugar Gang has come to Wario's castle for revenge. They've stolen his treasure, flooded his home, and left a giant living alarm clock to torment him. The game is set up differently from its predecessors. Wario is far more agile, and the environments are set in larger, more varied, and interesting locales as a result. There are no bottomless pits, no power-ups, no lives or health, and when Wario gets hit, all he loses are coins. Wario has finally emerged from the typical platforming of his roots. He can't die. When an enemy hits him, he either loses coins or transforms, entering a new temporary state. Being crushed lets him glide around and fit into tight spaces. Being overfed lets him smash through everything in his way. Being set on fire causes him to run around in a deranged panic until he begins burning everything to a crisp, and then he just shakes off his own ashes like a dog shedding. Every transformation lets you bypass certain obstacles while presenting a few of their own, and each level is designed around this. The environments are carefully crafted obstacle courses designed to divert Wario from his goals, and each mistake only sets Wario back seconds at worst. This applies to the boss fights as well. Each is designed to test you on a single concept, and if you can demonstrate effective use of that concept 3 times in a row, you win. Some of the bosses are simple jump here fights. Some are surprisingly technical. One has Wario trying to out-shoulder ram a giant beast from a previous game. The game's chapters seem linear at first, with 5 levels per chapter and no map screen in between. But once you beat the final boss and the credits roll, you'll see just how sprawling the game is. There are 50 levels, and the longest possible path only takes you through 25 of them. So, you revisit some of the forked levels and realize there were hidden exits there the entire time, in addition to the hundreds of extra coins hidden in the walls and floors and ceilings. That's right, Wario Land 2 has branching pathways, but in a far more organic way than some examples like Castlevania 3. You descend into the caves beneath Wario Castle by finding a hidden exit in the cellar. You approach the undersea temple by sinking a pirate ship instead of riding it to shore, and on top of that, you get to explore the now flooded ship on your way out. The game has 10 chapters and bosses, 5 endings, and hours of gameplay that alternates between precise platforming and digging for secrets. The actual treasure is one of the game's few spotty parts. There's 1 per level, and while finding them is fun, collecting them involves a picture-matching minigame that's short but will probably get old after you've done it a dozen times, and the end of each level has you playing the same number minigame to unlock pieces of a treasure map, but actually I never really got tired of this one. The minigames are repetitive, but they provide a brief and thoughtful lull in an experience otherwise dominated by jumpy, smashy gameplay, with a bare-bones story and no dialogue at all. So anyway, collecting all 50 treasures and all 50 map panels unlocks the final challenge. A surreal, sinister level with no treasure, no distractions. It simply challenges Wario to finish the stage as quickly as possible, and it tests every skill you've picked up along the way. In summary, Wario Land 2 is a simple, engrossing, fun platformer that tests your inventiveness and timing, keeps trying to entertain you all the way through, and exceeds the quality of every other Super Mario Land before it, and even some core Mario games. So when it came time for the next game in the series, what was R&D1 to do? They'd made a pretty decent handheld series but reinvented it in the last game, and any remnant of a Wario template had been tossed out. So they took what had worked most recently and made it better. The setting, an island sealed inside a magical music box. A hidden figure asks Wario to hunt down 5 music boxes sealing its power. Wario can keep whatever other treasure he finds. There are 25 levels spread across an island's 4 compass directions, and you can visit the levels you've unlocked at any time. Wario starts out with a much smaller toolkit than before. All he has is his shoulder barge, like in Wario Land 1. He doesn't even pick up his first power-up until after the first boss, but when he does, it's added to his arsenal permanently. Not only that, but every power-up and about half the treasure you find unlocks the way to more levels and more treasure. Wario Land 3 is, I'm proud to say, a Metroidvania, and by the studio that helped invent the genre. There's no massively connected network of hallways or tunnels. You pick up treasure, the game gives a little scene of which areas have expanded, and you simply rocket over there to begin hunting. The new areas usually branch off from old ones, so you rarely have to redo platforming sections, and never have to refight a boss. Each level has 4 treasure chests that are generally available one at a time, and by the time you return for the 3rd or 4th chest, you start to feel like you've mastered the level, like you know its ins and outs. There's actually a mechanic based around this growing familiarity. The 8 giant music coins in each level seem like window dressing, and can't be spent on anything. But the game remembers the most you've ever collected in each level, and collecting all 8 in one go stands as proof that you've dug through the level's deepest secrets. Wario Land 3 has some really clever design choices in it. My favorite is a quarter of the map locked in an endless night, and when you find an item that summons the sun, every level changes. Water levels sink, ice melts, sunlight pours through haunted halls. The locations are based on geography. You explore a bay, a swamp, and a forest, sure, but also a coursing valley, a tidal coast, a desert ruin not based on Egypt for once. You even explore the same mountain from several different angles, its foothills, its caves, and the crater up top. The more treasure you collect, the more each area seems to change and expand, with enemies spawning or transforming, and new doorways appearing. There's a mysterious tower that seems to go upward forever, a town that gets infested with zombies at night, even a few levels that are basically optional and serve to test your platforming and navigation skills. There are downsides, of course. Most of the cave areas seem to have too much on fire, and they blur together in my memory. There's also a recurring minigame here, a precise golf tee, that you'd better get pretty good at if you want to keep progressing. But in general, Wario Land 3 feels like a fully realized sequel, with more interesting areas, more silly transformations, and a system of levels changing that I really wish I'd see in more games. Wario Land 2 and 3 are the finest adventures Wario has ever been on, and they've been hiding in the Game Boy Color's back catalog for decades, rarely referenced, but fondly remembered. By the year 2000, sales numbers had firmly established Mario, Pokemon, and Zelda as Nintendo's biggest sellers. 3D gaming was the new hotness, and Wario was quietly adventuring in the shadows. In November 2001, the same month that the GameCube released in North America, the final true Wario Land game debuted, Wario Land 4. This one is not a Metroidvania, and Wario has a life bar again, dropping a lot of what made the series unique. Wario investigates a mysterious pyramid with portals to strange, treasure-filled areas. There are 18 levels that go quickly, but are rich and interesting, with the minigames we've come to expect by now. Most of the levels are in groups of 4, and you can approach the groups in any order you choose. I like these puzzle rooms that appear sporadically. They generally involve Wario trying to collect all of the room's loot through precision and cleverness. But the game lacks that open-ended creativity of 2 and 3, and the minigames aren't really tied to progression. They seem introduced more to give you something to do than to enrich the experience. As a Wario Land game, this one falls short of the series' peak, but as a video game, it's still excellent. Your objective in each stage is to find a ghostly key that opens the way to the next, but you can't actually escape until you hit the frog switch at the end of the level. When you hit the switch, this happens. Your leisurely progression becomes a frantic, tense race back to the entrance, and the best parts have the level transforming, opening new pathways or presenting new obstacles. This is Wario Land 4 at its best, especially when you realize there's still treasure to find, and you have to balance clutching at secrets and trying to make your frenzied escape. The boss fights are great too. There are only 5 of them, but each one is a multi-phase clash against a gigantic, bizarre monster. And here Wario Land 4 shows off its fantastic pixel art and design. I think it just might be the best looking game on the Game Boy Advance. There are some great locations too. A creepy haunted hotel, a toy room come to life, a cluttered landfill, even a giant pinball themed level. Wario Land 4 may not be as innovative as its predecessors, but its production is immaculate. It's bursting with fun animations, diverse music, fast, smashy gameplay, and the thick Wario charm we'd soon see a lot more of in the WarioWare series. With 4, R&D1's Wario Land series was quietly drawing to a close. While working on a successor to Mario Paint for the Japan-only Nintendo 64 DD, members of R&D1 began quietly working on a similar project without the boss's permission, one that involved lots of short, punchy microgames. The project was eventually discovered, approved, and turned into WarioWare Inc. Mega Microgames, with Wario chosen as its protagonist because he was fittingly idiotic and silly. WarioWare was great, terrific even, and its quirky appeal caused it to quickly overshadow the rest of Wario's legacy, even to this day. R&D1 staff turned their main focus to this new series, even after the department was absorbed into Nintendo's new Software Planning and Development division in 2004. Around the same time, Nintendo and the developer Treasure released Wario World on GameCube, Wario's first 3D adventure, but I've never really liked this one. There's less speedy platforming and more messy, linear levels focused on combat, and the game is only 8 levels, too short for a console release. The game just doesn't feel as good as the others, though it at least has what is either the best or worst pause screen music of all time. A few years later, Nintendo released Wario Master of Disguise, but this one was actually developed by Suzak, a company you've never heard of. It's a sharp departure from the Wario Land games, mostly just an unpolished exploration of neat things you can do with the DS's touchscreen, and nowhere near the quality of WarioWare Touch, which came out a few years earlier. Wario Land's last hurrah was Wario Land Shake It by Goodfeel, the company that would eventually develop Kirby's Epic Yarn. It revisits the gameplay of Wario Land 4, and it's pretty decent, with gorgeously hand-drawn animations and scenery, simple Wiimote controls, and the return of Wario's nemesis Captain Syrup. But it still feels a little more stiff than the rest, more like something the B-Team put together. Wario's future was in the WarioWare games, though even those began to decline in popularity, and in the 11 years since Shake It came out, there has not been a single new game released with Wario Land in its title. Wario Land was never the most popular or even the best Nintendo series, but I've always been fond of it, and to me it scratches that platforming adventure itch that 2D Mario games never really have. And other games have occasionally given fond tribute to the Wario Land series as well. In Super Smash Bros., Wario has several attacks based on his Wario Land moveset, with even more in Project M. Wario Land actually has an entire stage dedicated to it in Project M, with stage music that references motifs from past Wario games. Beyond that, Wario Land's music has been largely left in the dust. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate contains not a single song from the core Wario Land games, only one from Shake It. But I've actually learned that Wario's victory theme was an original composition written for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which only later became the basis for the theme song of Shake It. Another bit of odd trivia is that R&D1's Metroid Fusion was actually built from Wario Land 4's engine. Debugging reveals a few tiles and sprites hidden in the game's data, and Mario Party 9 actually features the Wario board, an amiibo-locked bonus board that lovingly references nearly every Wario Land game. The Wario Land series may be over, but as with Mother and F-Zero, it is not forgotten. Wario himself has kept up appearances in Nintendo's Sports series and other crossovers like Super Smash Bros., so in general, he's established himself as a permanent fixture in Mario's roster of secondary characters. But I'd be overjoyed to see another first-party Wario Land game, or even a platformer that draws inspiration from it, Shovel Knight style. And I think you'd probably enjoy the Wario Land games as well. Maybe you'll give them a chance and see what I'm talking about. Even if not, I hope I've given an interesting look at Wario's odd handheld origins, his best platforming games, and the series' sad but understandable decline. Thank you for watching.